Is everyone lying about the world being a globe? Were our parents lying and our grandparents? Were our teachers lying or their teachers? Are all the professors and astrophysicists of the world lying when they assert with an apparent ignorant certainty that the world is obviously a globe? Are all of these people lying, or are they all simply repeating what they've been programmed to think since they were small children? One thing is for certain, there are some liars involved in this whole deception, but not nearly as many as you'd think. In order to technically be lying, you need to intentionally deceive someone, which is obviously not the case with everyone in the world who claims or asserts the world to be a spinning sphere. Everyone has indeed been fooled about the true shape and nature of our world since a phase in their life when they believed in the tooth fairy, but even small children need to be convinced or coerced into believing the lie that we live on a spinning sphere, which defies all logic and common sense, the entire premise of which is glued together by nonsensical assumption on top of nonsensical assumption on top of nonsensical assumption. If you believe in something to be true, you're technically not lying as if you misinform people as to this falsehood, as you yourself have been deceived and are therefore technically not lying. On the other hand, ignorance of the law doesn't excuse you of its consequences in a court of law, so let's think about it this way. The people of the world are unintentionally misleading other people due to their inherent misunderstanding of the true shape and nature of our world, ingrained into the collective consciousness at the very earliest stages of awareness. The entire world is unwittingly participating in this deception. However, ignorance of the deception does not necessarily excuse us of the consequences involved with blindly disseminating a total lie. Let me give you an example. Everyone is not technically lying if you consider something like Google Earth. Google Earth is a series of composite images of our flat Earth wrapped around a sphere like a texture in a video game. I can assure you the 3D mappers and animators at Google are not liars and are simply doing their job as instructed by management and are compartmentalized to their one specific task. Now, is someone at Google being dishonest about the whole thing? Sure, there must be people at the very top of the power structure of Google or the military information that they gather their info from who are aware of this deception. However, not necessarily the owners of Google or the shareholders of Google, or even the nerds sitting around computers mapping the different strips of data onto the sphere Earth. There is a military effort since the 1950s after Operation High Jump and the subsequent Antarctic Treaty to cover up the fact that our world is a plane and not a globe. Since Google was essentially renting the satellite space from the military satellites for a good portion of its original virtual map versions, and have incrementally increased their own personal information gathering as Google increased in size and capacity to do so, which has most certainly involved military oversight and influence as well. So there are probably a few scientists working with Google who are aware of the deception. However, the programmers or designers or the nerds looking at data coming in from the questionable sources, which never dare be questioned, are not all lying. On the contrary, they are simply doing their job with blinders on, compartmentalized in their little cubicle, totally ignorant of the big picture. This is the case in all power structures found in our world. Those at the bottom of the power structure are totally unaware of the overall project goal and focus specifically on their job alone, and are by definition not involved with other aspects of any given project. The same can be said about management, only their area of focus is slightly more robust than the person beneath them. As you go up in the ranks of, say, Google or any corporation or religious or military structure, or the hierarchical structure of Freemasonry or esoteric and Talmudic ritualism, the very same structure of the Pharisees, which was exposed and vehemently opposed by Christ, only those at the very top of the power structure are aware of the big picture and are never involved with the legwork of the people beneath them, but ensure that their true goals are never known by the entire body of the structure, or even at the top levels of management, for lack of a better word. It's an interesting side note, but if you study the power structures of the world, again, Freemasonry, structured religion specifically, and especially Catholicism, the military, Satanism, and all other forms of esoteric Kabbalism and Talmudism, Skull and Bones is another example, corporations, financial institutions, worldwide cooperatives such as the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations, the Motion Pictures Rating Association, and of course Google would be included in such a pyramidal type power structure, where the people at the top of the power structure will be aware of the big picture, while individuals at the lower levels of the pyramid are simply focused on their specific part of the project. This gives the Masons, and likewise Google, a plausible cover story of normal, likable, average, honest people working towards the bottom levels who can attest that Google or Masonry are completely legitimate, and these people are not lying. In all respects, not everyone is lying to continue this deception. However, whoever professes the world as a globe is indeed disseminating the deception. The globe Earth model has been thoroughly debunked. However, people will point to things like Google Earth as proof of a globe. All of the people at Google couldn't be lying about this. However, this is totally missing the point. The way in which all power structures on Earth are set up allows for any absurd deception to be widely disseminated and purported by vast numbers of totally innocent and oblivious people to create the details and proof of the lie without even knowing it. A private in the military is going to do what he is told, just as a sergeant will do what he's told, just like a lieutenant will do as they're told, just like the colonel will do as he's told, and up to the general, who will do what he's told by the five-star general, who's the general ultimately beholden to when the buck finally stops. Well, obviously, the President of the United States, who happen to be overwhelmingly Freemasons, which is exactly the esoteric Kabbalism and Talmudism that loves to set up pyramidal power structures and divvy out orders down the chain of command. But beyond the President, above him, who does the buck stop with? Well, it's supposed to be the American people. However, this obvious truth outlined in the Constitution and the checks and balances built into our republic have been totally perverted and turned upside down into a pyramid power structure, just like all the other structures of power and control of our world, with the very few holding the power and the knowledge at the top. So, the programmer at Google, with his blinders on, working on his little compartmentalized cubicle, mapping strips of data around a sphere to create the wonderful spectacle of Google Earth, he's not lying. He's simply doing his job as he's been instructed to do, and since he obviously knows the Earth is a globe, he would see no problem mapping the flat strips of data around a spherical Earth. I could possibly imagine a few conversations arising between such a programmer or graphic artist at Google with his superior when he hypothetically noticed an anomaly in the data.
Hey, boss man, I noticed that all the strips of data we're getting appear to be completely flat. I understand that should be the case as the satellite is directly overhead of the ground it's viewing, but what about the ground way off in the distance? Why is that so also apparently flat, and there doesn't appear to be any curvature?
Gee, I don't know, Brian. That's a good question. Neither one of us are satellite engineers, so we could possibly ask them if we wanted answers.
Okay, well, don't the satellites belong to the military? Do we really have military personnel working with Google, or do we just borrow the data from them and use that data to get our maps?
Gee, I don't know, Brian. That's a good question for upper management. I just get paid to slurp coffee all day and make sure you get those strips of data wrapped around a sphere properly. How's that coming, by the way?
Well, it's going very well until I noticed this anomaly.
What anomaly?
Well, the one I just told you about, with all the ground appearing to be level regardless of distance.
Okay, Brian, if it's that important to you, I'll go and find out.
2 days later.
Brian, you know that question you had about the data being flat? Well, it turns out that since the satellite is taking its images in strips, the ground directly beneath the satellite will always appear to be flat.
Boss man, I know that. I already told you that it's flat many miles into the distance. I'm trying to figure out how to accurately represent this on a sphere, and I can't seem to make the strips to line up accurately due to this anomaly.
Look, Brian, just converge the two strips from the apparent distance out 5 miles or so, and then expand upon either strip proportionally as that area is zoomed in upon. I told you, we already got the answers from upper management, and that's how we're going to do it.
Okay, but I don't think this makes any sense. I have no idea how to account for these discrepancies accurately, and it is my job to make an accurate map of the sphere Earth. I need you to go back to management and ask them specifically why the data is apparently not wrapped around any sphere, regardless of distance from straight down.
2 days later.
Brian, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. You're being too disruptive, and it's not your job to interpret the data. That job is done by the other Brian in data. You are Brian in rendering, so you're stepping outside of your boundaries as defined in your contract. I'll expect to have your cubicle cleared by lunch. Your severance package will include a lifetime supply of free Google searches, and this spherical globe Earth you can set on your mantelpiece.
See, this is how NASA works, and all military branches work. This is how Freemasonry or esoteric Kabbalism and Talmudic rituals, including Satanism and Luciferianism, work. This is how corporations work, including Google, and we cannot claim that everyone must be lying to cover up the sphere Earth. The world being flat and stationary is so far removed from the conventional view held by all people in the world, even a very intelligent person such as Brian in that example would never think to conclude that the data they're viewing is proof of a flat stationary Earth, because such a thing is totally impossible according to their lifelong paradigm of a heliocentric solar system or Big Bang universe or globe Earth model. Now, psychopaths have a tendency to desire power and control over people, but also want to be loved and adored by people. Psychopaths tend to have certain attributes which help them to rise through the ranks of any power structure, especially the Kabbalistic Talmudic ritual-based structures such as Freemasonry, Satanism, and the modern U.S. military. The military has recently begun removing generals who possess a moral compass and will promote soldiers due to their lack of emotion or empathy, just as the case with Kabbalism. Normal, non-psychopathic people do not have a tendency to crave power over others, and mostly do not care how others view them, since most people don't do psychotic things, such as sacrifice their integrity by joining secret societies and swearing oaths of secrecy. Normal people see the mindset of a psychopath as unthinkable, and therefore it's impossible for them to relate to a psychopath's goals or tactics used by them to reach their goals. In conclusion, I submit that the majority of people in this world are totally oblivious to the truth of our world being flat and stationary, and even most of the people involved with disseminating the lie are oblivious to the truth. Such ignorant, normal people are necessary to give the psychopaths at the top of the pyramid the legitimate cover they need to perpetuate their nonsensical lies and provide the outward appearance of wholesome, normal people who would never be involved with deceiving people into believing in a globe, in the case of Google, or sacrificing an innocent child for blood rituals in the case of esoteric Kabbalism and Talmudic rituals, in the case of your average Blue Lodge Freemason. Since all structures of power in our world are well organized in such a manner that only the select group of people at the very top of the structure are privy to the big picture, the tops of all of these pyramids also appear to converge at one single point. You could call this point of convergence the Illuminati, but even they are beholden to a singular source of influence. They will tell you that it's the grand architect of the universe. However, it's plainly obvious they are worshiping Lucifer and are practicing Talmudic rituals along with esoteric pagan and Kabbalistic practices. Every chance they get, all of these groups will denounce Christ first and foremost, which should tell us something about the groups, but also should tell us something about the stories of Christ. If Christ was just another ordinary man whom people blindly follow for no reason, then why would they need to go to all these lengths to silence his words or discredit him?